Hey guys, welcome back. Joe Brunsman, insurance broker to the stars. Today I'm talking about why I think your MSP should be contractually requiring your clients to carry cyber insurance. Now, I have talked about this before in a few other videos. You can see them on the screen in front of you here, but it was all kind of spread around, and so I thought I'd bring all this together for the community so that everybody's singing off the same sheet of music, and then you as an MSP business owner could make that consideration for yourself. All right, so I'm going to be going through kind of the different facets of why I think this is a good idea for you guys to get in your MSAs. All right, what do I ultimately want you to avoid? I want you to avoid being that guy. Now, this, of course, it's the $1 million MSP lawsuit. That video did really well. I'll put a link to it actually at the very end of the video here so you can watch it there. But suffice to say, kind of reading between the lines, I don't think that the law firm that's suing the MSP actually had cyber insurance, because if they were, and you'll find out why here later why that is, I don't think they would have been suing them for this amount of money. Likewise, I mean, I probably wouldn't have even made the video. Now, maybe I would have made a video saying, hey, here's a couple things that could have assisted with this, and here's a couple additional items that the MSP could have, potentially utilized to mitigate that type of claim. But when you have a loss that big, yeah, you're just going to get sued. Now, did the MSP actually do anything wrong? I don't know. We've only seen one side of the complaint so far. But, if it's a $60,000 loss, maybe they just would have taken that on the chin. Maybe they could have fired their MSP, or maybe they could have worked together and hashed something out. But $1 million, that's going to turn some heads. And of course, litigation very likely to arise with the loss of that magnitude. So, before we begin, I will say that a couple years ago, maybe a few years ago now, I made a video talking about this before. I got a little bit of heat for it. So, I think since then I've been proven right. But you should know, if you're on the fence here, if you don't already have this in your MSA, one, remember that requiring your clients to carry cyber insurance is actually becoming very, very common. All right. It's not like cyber insurance is that expensive. It's not super hard to get. It's not particularly onerous as far as requirements go per se. So kind of the prevailing market pressures are actually on your side. It's not that big of an ask. I would also say, hey, you could always just blame me or blame the insurance company, because your insurance company is definitely going to want your clients to have cyber insurance if a claim pops off. Next, keep in mind, if you need to explain this to client, there's kind of three main avenues. So I've worked on both sides of the equation. I've had my cyber insurance clients where they got hit and they had an MSP. And I've also had MSPs where their clients got hit. So middle of the road here, one, you have to consider if you're talking to your clients and they go, well, why do I need to buy this? Don't you take my money to keep me safe? What you can tell them is one of three things. One, keep in mind, lawsuits take a long time to be completed. So in the case of that MSP $1 million lawsuit that I referenced earlier, I wrote it down here. So the event occurred in February of 2023. The lawsuit wasn't actually filed until February of 2024. And then the case management conference, that paperwork just came out. That's not even until November of 2024. So who knows how long that's going to take? This could easily go into 2025. Ostensibly, that law firm is sitting on $1 million loss for probably over 2 years by the time that case gets settled, maybe even 3, depending upon what happens. So, tell your client, hey, yeah, we have our own insurance policy in the highly unlikely event that we just make an honest mistake, right? We want to make you whole again. We want to be responsible. But once it gets in the hands of those darn attorneys, it's just going to take forever, right? And we don't want you potentially going out of business if you're sitting on some 6 or 7 figure loss waiting for insurance to pay out. We don't want to see that happen to you, and I don't think you want that to happen to your business. Next, not every loss is going to be a claim against an MSP. So, imagine a $25,000 loss. Social engineering scam. Now, that's probably too small in most jurisdictions and pragmatically to be an insurance claim. But for an SMB, that's a chunk of change. All right. So with that, hey, warn your clients. These small social engineering scams, you want to make sure if you get hit with something big that you're going to have insurance for that. Next, remind them that it's not just for them, it's actually for all of your clients, and that makes sense because, hey, Mr. Client, yeah, we have our own insurance policy. But now imagine some business you don't even know exists that's a client of ours down the street. They lose $1 million to a bad guy, so now they're suing us for $1 million. That could wipe out our entire policy so that if we're trying to be responsible and make you whole again, well, our policy just may be gone by that point, and that's not fair to you. So that's why we require every one of our clients to have cyber insurance. All right. Next, I just want to point out that keep in mind that just because it wasn't your fault doesn't mean it's not your problem. So part of this is actually protecting your own tech E&O policy from frivolous lawsuits or claims where realistically there was just nothing you could have done about it. But you have to keep in mind that just in terms of reality, juries, the judge, plaintiffs, they just think you know everything about every piece of technology and you're a subject matter expert on all things. Now, as a former IT guy, like, hey, yeah, there's a lot of internet searching going on in the background when there's some type of new problem. And obviously you're very adept at fixing those issues much faster than the average business owner could ever do that. But those opposing parties, they're just going to think, well, how did you not know about this super obscure technology? Or how could you not foretell that Microsoft would put out a patch that would just bomb everything and screw everything up? Right? They're not going to understand that. So keep in mind, defense is based on technical knowledge. While I wish that was a good way to go, those are often exceedingly difficult to defend against. So now take somebody like an accounting firm. All right, accounting claims can also be quite complex as well, but they have state societies, they have codes of professional standards and ethics, they have rules that are effectively codified in law, so they can just point to their own industry rules from their own state society that's backed up by their state legislature that's saying, hey, we're not responsible for X, Y, and Z. MSPs, you guys just don't have that, all right? So you are starting defense effectively bare, if not already in a deficit, just because what you do is so hard and actually mystifying for the average person. Next, you also got to keep in mind, you're probably not an insurance expert. You're not a forensics expert. You're not a legal expert. Don't go down those avenues. You could void your policy or end up in a position where you just don't have any insurance coverage. So you want to be in a position where you could say, hey, this is where my expertise ends and somebody else's expertise begins. Now, in a video called MSP Considerations After a Client's Cyber Event, I think is what I titled that one. You can tell I was not an English major in college. In that particular video, what do I point out? 3 elements to keep in mind. Identify, contain, refrain. And I'll show you an example of that here a little bit later on. But imagine basic business email compromise. Hey, client, you told me something was going on with your email. You know what? We changed the default, or we changed the password back to the default. We changed all the rules back in the inbox. We did some rudimentary looking around. We didn't see anything getting siphoned off, but we're not forensics experts. We're not your attorney. Highly recommend you reach out to your cyber insurer for additional consideration, information, guidance, etc. Now, that's pushing the onus back onto the business owner where it should reside. It's now up to the business owner to make the risk decision if they want to get cyber insurance involved or if they're comfortable with not doing that and they just want to proceed as normal. All right. But it's really handy for you as an MSP to kind of have that in your back pocket where you can say, okay, we did everything we think we should reasonably do and everything we can think of. But hey, moving forward, there's all these possible scenarios that could go wrong. We want to push that back to the business owner. They have cyber insurance. That should help you sleep a lot better at night. All right, next. Big picture stuff here. When someone wants to bring a claim against your MSP, what do they have to show? This all goes back to Article 3 standing. Now, obviously, it kind of varies between states, but the gist at a 30,000 foot view is one, they have to show, hey, we've been injured. So we had a data breach. We had a business email compromise. We fell victim to a DDoS. We had a social engineering scam, etc. Next, they have to show traceability causation, right? So they have to show, but for the error or omission in the services that you were rendering, hence E&O insurance, but for the error or omission of what my MSP was doing or not doing, I never would have been injured. So for example, hey, injury in fact, we got hit with ransomware, traceability. My MSP didn't tell me that ransomware existed. He didn't adequately configure my firewall. He didn't tell me about these additional tools that could have mitigated that threat. So therefore, I think it's his fault. Now, what do they want from this? There has to be some element of redressability. Now, what is that commonly? It's just money, okay? So think about all the big ticket items when a client has a cyber event. Attorney, forensics, data restoration, business interruption reimbursement, reputational harm, ransom payment, et cetera, et cetera. All of that should be borne by their cyber insurance company. All right. So now what does that mean? Ideally, that means, hey, it just comes back to super vanilla business law claims like breach of contract, unjust enrichment, negligence, stuff like that. But ideally, the dollar figure is going to be a lot lower, and you're going to have a limitation of liability clause in your MSA that hopefully you're comfortable with. Please go look at that, speak to your attorney to make sure that it's appropriate. But at the very least, what are we trying to do? Bring down the total dollar amount that you could have a claim for. Now, why is that ultimately important for your MSP? If we start thinking long term, we don't want some massive loss sitting on your policy. So there's a big difference between a $60,000 loss on a tech E&O policy and $1 million loss on a tech E&O policy. The former, it's, you know what, renewal's probably going to be expensive. We're going to have to do some additional stuff. It's going to be an exercise, but we'll get through it. The latter, the $1 million loss, you might not just get insurance, or it could be so darn expensive that you might have to go bare for that policy period. And remember, claims are going to stay on your loss run for at least 5 years, if not more in some cases. So you don't want that big dollar figure hanging over your head. It's nice to keep those loss ratios down. It's nice to keep that big dollar figure down. All right. Now keep in mind, all of this is to say that legal remedies are generally to make the insured whole again. They're not supposed to profit from this. All right. So that goes back to the redressability element, right? It's, hey, you can't generally sue for this business interruption cost you had as a business. You can't really sue your MSP for that because your cyber insurer already took care of that for you. All right. Insurance, the legal world, it's not meant to provide this like huge monetary windfall to people. All right. You're not trying to, like, we as a society and as a legal system, like, you don't really want people profiting from a loss. You just want to get them back to where they were before. So if you want to read a little bit more about that, principal indemnity, principle of full compensation, et cetera, you can dive down that rabbit hole. Now, I always get the question, hey, what about punitive or exemplary damages? Now, once again, generally that's for gross negligence, which is a higher bar than negligence, or intentional misconduct. What are they trying to do? They're trying to deter others from going down that same path. Effectively, they're trying to make an example out of you and attach a bunch of dollar figures to it. So hopefully none of you are acting in a grossly negligent fashion or intentionally harming your clients. So I don't think that should be that big of an issue for you. Next, here's an example that I spoke about before, I mentioned before, of pointing to cyber insurance. All right. So let's imagine your client has a ransomware event. So you as an MSP, you go, all right, hey, you know what? There could have been data exfiltration. Maybe your backups have dormant ransomware on them. There could be all types of legal considerations on the client side that you just wouldn't be made aware of. So for example, I've seen contractual provisions before in businesses where they go, hey, business, if you have any cyber event whatsoever, you have to tell us, right? Even if it's not a reportable event under the breach notification laws or any sort of like federal law. All right. You as an MSP, you're just not going to know that even exists. All right. So now let's say you go, hey, client, I think you should be aware of all of these issues. And they say, hey, I don't care. Restore from backups. Right. So now you as an MSP, you could go in writing and make sure you preserve this. You go, hey, client, you know what? I can just restore from backups. All right. I can do that. But I still think you should consider reaching out to your cyber insurer because of all these reasons that we spoke about before, right? Attack loops, data exfiltration, etc. Identify, contain, refrain. Here's what I saw. Here's what I did. Moving forward, talk to your cyber insurer. Now, your client could just say, hey, you know what? Kick rocks, man. I'm not going to pay the 5, 10 grand, whatever of my deductible or retention to get my cyber insurer involved. I just think it's a basic ransomware event. Now, does your client really have an educated basis to make that decision? Probably not. I would say you guys are much more adept and knowledgeable on these types of issues than kind of the general SMB client. But ultimately, hey, you've said, I think you should reach out to your cyber insurer. Here's a bunch of reasons why this could go sideways. I'm not your attorney. We're not forensics experts, et cetera, et cetera. They could still tell you to kick rocks. So there you might be able to say, okay, but circumstantially, you could also put in a waiver of liability, right? So you could say, okay, we've warned you of the risks. You're still fine with it. So we're going to go ahead with what you want us to do, but you're not going to hold us legally liable if we do it. All right. What does that all boil down to? I told them there was a problem. I offered to help. They didn't want my help. Bad thing happened. How can you hold me responsible? All right. That's not a technical defense. That's a defense that anybody's grandmother who doesn't know the first thing about technology could easily understand from the jury box. All right. Now, you may also want to consider as an MSP, if you have a client that's just acting really out of pocket, maybe you should report that to your own cyber insurer just in case. But that is a video for another week. All right. Now, I get this question all the time. Hey, what about subrogation? Or if they don't say the word subrogation, they're alluding to subrogation. Now, what is that? Let's imagine your client's cyber policy pays out, and then their insurer goes, hey, you know what? We paid all this money. We're going to come back against your insurance policy, Mr. MSP, and we're going to recover all the losses that we shelled out for our client. Now, I will say at the moment, this is mostly a hypothetical risk. I've only ever heard of this potentially occurring once in this area, but probably I'd say, in the next 5 years, I think it's going to become more common. So why not just talk to your attorney now, ask about a waiver of subrogation in your MSA, right? Just ask about it. Why not? Hey, what could it hurt? I don't know. Maybe they could say yes. Maybe they could say no. Now, obviously, your client is going to have to reach out to their cyber insurer in most cases and get that in writing that the insurance company is okay with that. Keep in mind, in some cases, you might end up actually costing them a little bit of money to do that. It's up to underwriter's discretion. So make sure you're, prepared to handle what that's going to be. Imagine it's an extra $500 a year or something like that. Well, hey, maybe you want to lower your price, your ARR by $500, whatever per year, just to make up the difference. So that way everybody's happy. Now, I would say the sooner you get on board with this, right, that waiver of subrogation should just keep renewing with each subsequent policy. So therefore, you guys are going to be way ahead of the curve when eventually the cyber insurance industry wakes up and starts coming against those tech E&O policies. All right. Now I get the question, all right, so let's say I'm on board, Joe, and I'm like, you know what? I'm going to require all my clients to carry cyber insurance. Should I be keeping track of this? Well, the short answer is yes. Now, obviously, I am just Joe on the internet. I'm an insurance guy. I am not the one telling you how to run your business. It's your business. So I would say, yes, you should be keeping track of that. Now, how could you do that? You could do it with a copy of a declarations page. You could do it with a copy of their policy. You could be requesting certificates of insurance. But pragmatically, what's going to happen? They're probably going to be asking you to fill out at least part of their cyber insurance application or talking to you about it. So yes, this is but yet another administrative task that I'm unfortunately laying at your feet. But I think it's actually going to be really quite useful for you. Okay. Now, if you want to know more about filling out client cyber applications, you can check out that video on my channel. So, real briefly, certificate of insurance. This is what they look like if you've never seen them before. This is an Accord form, which I think it's something like 95% of insurance people use. And so what are you going to see here? You're going to see, hey, the date the certificate was issued. You're going to see who the producer was. That's me right there. Next, you're going to be seeing who your client is, who their insurance company is. But then right there at the bottom is the important part. All right, so it should say cyber liability or something analogous. And then you see this X right here. Well, if you go up to the highlighted part, that's your subrogation wavered column and box. All right, so that's where the insurance guy on the other end should ideally, if they're paying attention, actually be checking that box. And they have policy number, limits, et cetera, et cetera. Quick aside. Generally, I'm going to say, like, hey, MSPs, you don't want to be opining on how much insurance your client should have. Leave that up to us knucklehead insurance guys. Let us take the liability for that. You probably don't want to be jumping on that grenade. Okay? Also, you probably don't want to opine on policy language to the extent of saying it should be X, Y, or Z. But if you see something potentially egregious, like it just doesn't cover something, then yeah, you could voice that concern and say, hey, client, maybe you want to go back to your insurance guy and ask about XYZ type of coverage to see if it's in there, right? But once again, that's if you're piling through these cyber policies. I'm going to say generally that's probably like the last thing that MSP owners want to do in my experience. All right, with that, hopefully you found that useful. That wasn't too long, wasn't too painful. All right, like, share, comment, subscribe. Hopefully that helped you guys out. Right above me, I'll put the MSP lawsuit video. And if you click over there on my beautiful face, you can subscribe to my channel. All right, guys, with that, stay safe.